Awesome. Thank you all for joining us for the Hack Your Syllabus Planning and Time Management for Teachers workshop. Joining us here today is Dr. Candace Burton, Director of Doctoral Education. They're going to discuss effective strategies for designation and managing course syllabi that engage students and support learning outcomes. I will now hand it off to Dr. Burton.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's always nice when people actually show up for a workshop. My name is Candace Burton, as Jay said, and I am the PhD director in the School of Nursing. And I'm also on the board of the Grad Academy, which is how I end up here. And we're going to talk today about how to handle being both a grad student and a teacher. Let me get my slides to go. Whoops. There we go. So why are we doing this? Because, all of this, basically. So everybody has a million things that they have to manage in grad school, whether that's your work, actually being in school, your family, whatever you need to actually get your job done, looking for grants, looking for scholarships, looking for fellowships, deadlines for things, papers, work, people in your life, pets. I don't even know. There's just always so very much going on. So hopefully this presentation is going to help you simplify at least one element of that and make your life a little bit easier as an educator and as a teacher while you're also a student. So I thought I would start off with a little bit about who I am and why do I know how to do this. I have been in academia for 20 years, and I'm really not sure how that happened because I feel like I just graduated the other day. My PhD, I actually had a minor track in education, and I still do education-oriented research in my role as a faculty member in nursing. As the PhD director, I mentor a lot of graduate and pre-licensure students, also work a lot with early career faculty, authors come to me sometimes for help with writing, clinicians, people who are trying to figure out, how do I actually do this teaching thing or this writing thing, or what if I want to get into research, or how do I change my practice in a way that makes sense, stuff like that. And as I said, I still do some scholarly work around education, different kinds of approaches to teaching, innovations in teaching, thinking about how we teach people how to teach, that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm here. And I'm going to tell you how to hack your syllabus, because I have had many, and I mean many, early career faculty and or grad students who needed to be teaching crying in my office or on my Zoom because they just felt like they could not do it all. And so when we came up with this idea for Hack Your Syllabus, I was like, yes, let me in. I will help you figure this out. So the first thing you've got to do as a teacher is you've got to go backwards, right? Because you need to figure out, we say a lot, begin with the end in mind. And in this case, that's exactly what you want to do. So whatever your students need to end up with or what they have to learn is where you need to start, right? So you want them at the end of the term to have certain things in place, right? You want them to understand certain things or have done certain things, or that, they are getting prereqs for a professional program, something like that, whatever. Or your course is sequenced and they need to be ready to go to the next spot, whatever. So figure out what they have to have at the end. Where do you need to get to? And then you've got to think about how are you going to best help them do that? And I put this here because I mean it. By best, I don't mean perfect, right? You need to give them the best that you can without sacrificing your own sanity or your own scholarly career, okay? So believe me, none of your faculty are perfect, and you don't have to be perfect either. Okay, so that's the first step, is where are we going and what are we doing in this handbag? So first we need to figure out how we get there, where we have to get to, where are we going at the end of the term. The second thing is, now take whatever that end is, and figure out what is the absolute bottom line thing that your students have to have in that process, right? So you've got to think about what they need in order, if they need to achieve certain outcomes by the end of the course, what are the pieces that they've got to have in order to be able to do that? If this is a prereq for something else and they need to be able to do something learned from this course in that course, okay, that's one of your bottom lines. right? Or if you know that they are going from your course into a course where they're going to draw on whatever they learned in your course. So I'm a PhD director, so I'm thinking about like a methods course, right? If this is a research course and they're going to go from methods into designing their study, you need them to have a pretty foundational understanding of what the methods, the different types of methods might be that they might then add to the design of their study. Okay. So you've got to think about what do they need to go from here? What's the bottom line that is going to get them to those outcomes that you've already looked at in step one? Okay. And you got to think about things like if you are inheriting this course, if this is a course that was taught by somebody else and now it's being handed to you, you may have different ideas. You don't have to take, if I hand you a syllabus and I say, this is your new course, you don't have to take that syllabus as gospel. Okay. However, number two there is very important. If this is a single section of a multi-section course, you need to be consistent with the other sections because students do talk, believe it or not. And you can't get away with giving everybody an A in your section if somebody in the other section is working harder, okay? So if you inherited the course, figure out, okay, what can you take from what's there? What do you want to keep? And what do you want to chuck? Okay. Be sure you're consistent if it's a multi-section course. Talk to the lead faculty. If it's a multi-section course, that's absolutely who you need to talk to. If it's, a course that you're just kind of being handed, talk to the department chair, any mentors that you have, your own chair, if you have a thesis committee or a dissertation committee already in place, just to make sure that you aren't like going cuckoo, right? If this is the first time you're doing this, the first time you're designing a course, then go and get somebody to talk to because we don't do a great job in a lot of our disciplines, aside from education, you people hush, at teaching people to teach. We are particularly bad at it in the sciences because we spend a lot of time teaching people how to do the science, right? And then guess what? You get out and you get a job or you get a postdoc and you're expected to teach. Well, you don't really, just because you've been taught doesn't mean you know how to teach, right? So get advice, find a mentor, come to more Grad Academy workshops, explore things that are available to you as resources. The Center for Teaching and Learning here is fantastic. Get some help, okay? Especially if you've never done this or if it's a course that's brand new to you, okay? That's step two. Step three, now we have an end where we want to get, and we have a bottom line, which we know which is the bare minimum of what we have to have for these students. You need to find the happy medium between these two. Okay, you need to figure out how can you essentially get to this without killing yourself and making sure you get this, right? Okay, so you want to get somewhere in between absolutely everything and just the basics. Okay, because just the basics are fine in a pinch, but it's probably not much fun if you do nothing but the absolute bare minimum. That's probably not much fun for you. It's probably not much fun for the students. Your evals are going to suck, et cetera, et cetera. So first thing to do, if you are not sure about something in your syllabus, throw it out. Less is more, okay? Because you got to remember that anything you assign, you also have to grade. So if you're not sure about something in the syllabus, you're not sure it's needed, get rid of it. Less content for students to create, less for you to comment and give feedback on. And remember that fewer or smaller assignments are less stressful for the students and more time for you to grade in between. Do not, however, do what I have seen some people do and have like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 assignments in the whole term and then a term paper that's worth 50% of your grade. Please don't do that. There is no reason to do that. My dog apparently agrees. Please don't do that because it just makes your students stress and they worry frantically about this paper. And then you've got to deal with stressed out students who are probably flooding your office hours and calling you all the time. And then you have to like grade these papers that are supposed to be absolutely outstanding. And it's more stress on you because you're like, am I grading too hard? Am I grading too soft? No, just don't worry about it. Okay. So basic rules. If you don't need it, don't do it. Less for you, less stuff from the students, less for you to grade, fewer and smaller assignments. I'm teaching an undergraduate course right now, and nothing in that course. They have a bunch of assignments, but nothing in the course is worth more than 20%. And the 20% is like is some big paper element that they have to do. Okay. So you want to think, if you know education speak, formative evaluation versus summative evaluation. Formative is those pieces all along the way, right? Like 10% here, 10% here, 20 here, 10 here, 5 here, whatever. Summative is the 50% paper. Okay. So usually formative is better because it's less stress on the students, less work for you to grade. And then if the pieces are building toward, so for example, in my class that I'm currently teaching, I had the students do the outline of their paper. Well, first they had to go to the library because these are undergrads. They had to go to the library, learn how to use the library, learn how to search for stuff, and give me a bibliography. Just a draft, just a few sources, just so I know they know what to do. Bibliography, outline, first draft, second draft, peer review in second draft, and then a final paper. By the time they've done all of that, I've seen that paper 3 times. I've seen all of the elements of it. By the time I get the final, I already know if their grade is going to be okay. And so do they, because it's not worth so much, right? So that's formative, right? Where you break something down, have them go through it, as opposed to summative, where you give a big exam or a paper at the end and it's 75% of their grade or something silly like that. Don't do that. Okay, step 4. Now you got to bust out the calendar, and then you got to bust up the calendar, because once you've figured out what more or less you're going to do in the course, you got to figure out when are you going to do it. I don't know if you know this, but there are different semester calendars at UNLV. Sometimes we have like a compressed short thing, like in the summer. In the School of Nursing, ours are insane. They're trimesters and they're like 18 weeks long. They're a hot mess. And then there's ones that are 12 weeks, right? So you need to know how many weeks do you have, right? And then within those weeks, how many days do you actually have? Because what usually happens to me is I've got everything mapped out and then I go look at the school calendar and I discover, oh, look, it's Nevada Day. We're shut that day, right? So I can't have anything due on that day, right? So then you got to black out all your holidays. So you got to get rid of, fall semester is the worst because you got to throw out Thanksgiving. And that's basically an entire week, right? And then there's Nevada Day, and I think there's at least a couple of other holidays. So you've got to get rid of any days that the university is technically closed because you can't have anything there, right? And it may, if your class happens to be on that day, you're not having class that day if it's an in-person class. Also, is it an in-person, hybrid, or online class? Because that's going to make a difference in terms of your time. If you have to be in BHS 302 from 2 to 4 every Thursday, that takes a chunk of the time that you have, the time that your students have, and then you've got to figure out what you're going to do with that time. Okay. How long do the students need to work on something? So if you have a paper that is due 2 weeks into the class, it's probably not going to be as good as a paper that's due closer to the end of the class. Okay. So when you're building out your syllabus, you want to think about how much time a student really needs to complete a particular activity. So if you assign a paper, they need at least, depending on whether these are graduates, undergraduates, etc., and what the paper is and how long it is, no less than 2 weeks, please. Okay. And that's a short, relatively imperfect kind of paper. That's probably true at most levels. Okay. So space your assignments accordingly so that they're not, and remember that they have other classes. We do forget that as educators. We do forget that our students also have assignments from other classes, other people. So think about, be generous as how long are they going to need? Then how long do you need to grade it and get it back to them? So if they need to build on the thing that they've just turned in for the next assignment, you need to turn that around more quickly than if it's a one-off. Okay. So for example, in the undergraduate class I'm currently teaching, I have a bunch of discussion board assignments where they have to post and then they have to respond to each other. Those are one-offs. It doesn't matter how long it takes me to grade those. I just need to get it done so that they can get their points. They don't need to build on it. The pieces of the paper, however, I need to get those turned back around to them relatively quickly so that they can start working on the next piece, incorporating whatever feedback I've given them. Okay. And what else is on your calendar that you need to work around? As grad students, things happen, conferences, seminars, for the science people, lab assays that need monitoring for like 12 hours at a time, stuff like that. So what else is on your calendar that you've got to work around? If you know, for example, this is my life, that you are going to a leadership seminar that is an entire week and you have been specifically told by the people running the darn thing that you will not have time to do any work while you are there, you got to make sure there's nothing in there. Okay. So there's things you're going to have to work around. Are there going to be weeks you need to cancel class? Are there going to be weeks you're not going to be available for office hours? Are there going to be weeks that you just won't have time to grade stuff? And always assume that crazy things will happen and give yourself some leeway along the way. Spread things out as much as you can, because I was thinking what to put in this number 7 here, and I was like, in case of another pandemic. And then I was like, well, we could have another pandemic, or we could have an earthquake and there's no power, or as happened to my doctoral student who's here in this room, SPSS could go down. So you want a little padding for both yourself and your students in case something happens, because something kind of always happens. Okay, step 5. Now you got to start building or breaking the assignments. Okay, so by now you've kind of figured out how the time is, where can things kind of fit into your calendar. Now you have to actually create the assignments. So you got to figure out what needs to happen for them to be able to complete the learning in this course. How many readings do you want? Are you using a textbook? Are you using like a workbook kind of thing? Are you going to have discussion boards? Is there a paper? Are they going to do some reflective writing, like a journal kind of thing? Are there problem sets, case studies, all this stuff, right? You got to pick out what you want to put in the class. Again, if you're inheriting it, you may have a framework that you can work from. You may be able to pick some things from that syllabus and use them. But if it's a brand new thing, or you've been given this thing and nobody's done it before, then you've got to figure out what goes in it. Okay. Please, please, please make it so that you have absolutely no more than that one heavy assignment every 2 weeks. A week for them to do it and a week for you to grade it. And that's still probably too much for you and for them. Okay, because if it's a big heavy chunk of stuff every 2 weeks, that's going to be hard on them. And that's going to be hard on you, because if it's a big long thing that you have to grade, that's time that you have to spend reviewing it, commenting on it. And sometimes it feels like doing the review probably takes longer than it took for the student to do the assignment. So absolutely no more than that. Okay. If you have little tiny assignments and they're like journal entries or discussion boards and they're like every week, that's okay. But if you're having them write things, if there's a problem set that's really long, try not to make anything due more often than every 2 weeks. And then consider if you can break things up and do iterative grading or iterative assignments. And because I know you're all asking now, what the heck is iterative grading? This is my course that I was talking about. Iterative grading is where you have the pieces come in and you look at it multiple times. So you see the elements as this is what I was talking about with formative evaluation, where they're building on top of each other, and then you've seen stuff. So these are my modules, which are 2 and 3 weeks long, depending on what it is. And you can see here, so here's their reading for the first week. They go to the library and they turn in their bibliography. So that's step 1 of the paper that is eventually going to come out of this class. Now, I would also like to point out that this is a team learning exercise. Okay, so I have broken my students into teams, and the team is writing a paper. They are not all writing an individual paper. This accomplishes several things. 1, it means I have less papers to grade. 2, it means that they learn how to work in a team, which in nursing, in my discipline, is actually really important. And we've already had some stuff come up. And so having them figure out how to work together, solve problems together, deal with issues that arise is a good thing, right? So in my course, they went to the library the first, I think it was the second week of class. They went to the library, they looked up some stuff, they all turned in an individual bibliography. Now I had them do individual ones here instead of one team one, because that way, if everybody put in 5 sources, then they already had 20 sources for their paper. Okay, these are things you got to think about. Module 2 was like weeks 2 through 3. So notice here that first bibliography was due on September 22nd. The next assignment is not due until October 13th. I just got these this weekend. So discussion board 1, and then an outline for the paper, okay? Library visit was 10, bibliography was 10 points. Discussion board 1 is 10 points. Outline of final paper is 15 points. Because I really wanted them to put some thought into this outline. I didn't want it to just be a mess, and mixed results. Okay, so then that's about 3 weeks between the bibliography and the outline of final paper. So they had time to work on it. Now we're going into the next module. So that's discussion board 2. Notice again, there's almost a month in between when things are due, and the first draft of the final paper. So I made it longer because they've got to get from the outline to the final paper. Now, I have some really smart students. One of my teams did an incredibly detailed outline with sources stuck in the outline so they knew where they went. They are going to have a much easier time creating this draft than my students who just turned in a basic outline, okay? So this is smart because they're managing their time, but this is also managing time for you. So you've graded a bibliography, you've graded the outline, now you're going to get to grade the draft. They're going to get feedback on the draft. While you are grading the draft, they are also going to do a peer review exercise where each team swaps with another team and provides feedback on the paper. So this is an individual one, although it's team papers, but each person will do a review. So that means that each team then gets back 4 different reviews of their paper with help to figure it out. So you're doing a couple of things here. I did this on purpose because, one, I wanted to be sure that they had feedback from somebody other than me. They've just learned how to do feedback from this. And when you read somebody else's paper, you get ideas for your paper, right? You read other people's writing and you start to think about your own writing and see that maybe, oh, I do that. It doesn't work. I don't like it. I'm going to stop doing that, whatever. Okay. And then finally, so here at 11:17, so we're coming up on Thanksgiving, so they get a good chunk of time to, I get the drafts back to them. They peer review each other's papers. Those are due the 1st of December. And then the actual final paper, which I have now seen 3 times essentially, is due on the 15th. Okay. So this is what iterative grading is. This is also summative assignments, because the more you see something, the less time you have to look at it later. And later is always when you have less time. Step 6, now you got to map the whole darn thing, right? Actually physically put all of this stuff on your calendar. If you know that discussion board 2 is due on October 15th, put that sucker on your calendar so that you know that as of December 15th, you have to start grading. Got to see where there's going to be issues, because there will be issues. You will have made a mistake. Something will have come up on your calendar. You will have promised to teach a seminar that's all day on a day that you were supposed to have office hours, something. Okay, there will always be issues. This is why you actually have to physically put it on your own calendar. Okay, and you can make it a different color so you know that it's for your class, not a class you're taking. Okay, map it all out. Actually physically lay it all out on the calendar. And if you need to, indicate to yourself, I need to start grading here, or I have to be done with grading by this date, right? The more detail you have in your calendar, the less likely it is that you're going to lose something, or you're going to forget something, or you're going to realize that it's 11 o'clock at night and you still need to grade 10 papers. Step 7, balance, balance, balance. Now that you've looked at it, now that you've put it on the calendar, how does it look? Does it look heavy? Does it look like, oh my God, I cannot do all of this? So the first thing, can you get rid of anything? Can you dump something? Do you really need all these discussion boards? Do you really need that problem set? Can you get rid of something? There's a saying in, before I was a nurse, I was a writer, and I have a degree in English. And there's a saying in literary writing, kill your darlings, by which we mean sometimes you have something that is so wonderful and so perfect, maybe a piece of writing, or in this case, an assignment, and you think it's so cool and so great, and it doesn't work, or it doesn't fit, or there just isn't time. Kill your darlings. I had a student a few years ago, a PhD student. She was working on a draft of a grant, and I told her about killing your darlings. And she messaged me the following week and she said, I edited like crazy this weekend. I killed so many darlings, I feel like a warrior. So if you can kill some darlings, get them out of there. Reduce the load on yourself and your students. Do it. Okay. You've also got to make sure that your students are getting or earning the credits that they're signed up for. So you need to know, for example, that 3 credits, a 3-credit course, should be about 3 hours a week. Okay, they should be doing course-related work for 3 hours a week. Now, if 2 of those are class and you're teaching them, fantastic. Okay, you don't need to do more than have them do an hour's worth of work outside the class. Okay. If you are teaching online, however, and it's an asynchronous course, you're going to have to do math on how much time. So for my course that I'm teaching, it's online, but we have some synchronous sessions. So I actually had to go through and kind of figure out and estimate, and there are tools online for how to do that. You can do this, just Google how much time I need that it's going to be for students to read what I'm assigning them to read, how much time they're going to need to spend on this assignment, that assignment, and then make sure that you have the correct number of hours of work in the course. You may have too much. The first time I laid out my course, I had too much, and I thought I was being generous. So I had to take some stuff out, but it was also because it was a 12-week course instead of 15. So sometimes you can take stuff out. Sometimes you might need to add more. Okay, but be thoughtful and think about planning for the slowest reader in the class. Okay, so if it's going to take somebody an hour to read a paper, that's the student that you need to teach to. All right, so be generous. Are there opportunities to have the students work together? Can they work in teams or pairs? Can they do things outside of class, give each other feedback, earn extra credit, etc., so that there's less weight on them for each piece of things, and there's less for you to do in terms of grading if they're working together. Okay, the team paper thing I actually stole from my previous university because we found out that we could do that. I was at the time I was co-teaching this massive upper division writing requirement foundations course to 70 nursing students, and my co-faculty and I really did not want to grade 35 term papers each along with everything else. So we found out that they could pair. And so we had them write, so then we cut it in half, and then we only had 35 total, which was about 17 each, which was a really nice change. So right now my students are, I think they're first or second year. So they're not super experienced at paper writing. So I have them in groups of 4 because that way it's a 10-page paper. So they really only have to write a couple of pages, 2.5 or so each of the paper. So because I've even had doctoral students, new doctoral students, panic over writing a 10-page paper. So to get comfortable writing that amount of stuff, I need them to write it together first and write smaller chunks, because anybody can write 2.5 pages. They really can. And then when is the heaviest part of the term going to be for you for grading, and also with respect to your own work and your own classes, and for them, right? So thinking about, is there going to be a 20-page paper that's due at the end of the term? That's going to be the heaviest for them, but that's also the heaviest grade for you if you haven't done drafts, right? Because you're starting from scratch with each paper that you have to read. Okay, if you know, for example, that at the end of term, you yourself have to have a dissertation chapter written, that you probably by the end of the term, you're going to have a heavy load, right? Because you're going to have to do a lot of reading and thinking to get to that dissertation chapter. So if you can shift the heavy part of grading further back, then you have time to get your chapter done there at the end. Okay, so you have to balance things out. Balance for them, balance for you, balance throughout the semester to make sure that you're not overloading them or yourself. Step 7A. Okay, this goes with the balance. Give them something silly, right? Something that is like a no-brainer or it's just ridiculous. For extra credit on an exam, students must write down their best dad joke. Do you want to hear my best dad joke? What did the daddy ghost say to the baby ghost when they got in the car? Fasten your sheet belt. You're welcome. So give them something silly. Give them something that's kind of a no-brainer. Your students are probably plenty stressed out throughout the semester. This immediately lowers the stakes. If you give them a goofy assignment, if you give them a goofy thing to do for extra credit. I had a professor in my PhD program, and I think on one of her quizzes, she had like true or false, my hair color is natural, referring to herself. Her hair was like flaming orange. It was definitely not natural. And that was extra credit if you said you said that it was not. So stuff like that, okay? So give them something silly, break it up. It makes it a little less stressful for everybody. And, maybe you get to read a bunch of really silly dad jokes. Okay, step 8. Now we're back to the calendar. Now that we've kind of figured all this out, we've thrown in something silly, maybe taken out a heavy assignment, figured out when we can grade and when they need us to grade, et cetera, et cetera. Everything on the calendar. Okay, there's a day at the beginning of every semester when I go to my calendar and I put bloody everything on it. Every meeting I have to be at, every class I have to teach, everything I have to grade, everything goes on. And for me, I put deadlines on it for like, I need to have this project done at this time. I need to get this paper submitted by this. I'm an editor for a journal. I need to have this special issue outlined by blah, 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 right? Put it all on the calendar. You want your calendar to be so detailed that you will never, ever, ever miss, forget, or skip something. Okay. You need everything on there as much as you can. All right. Look at it again. Make sure you have enough time to both do your own work as a student and get your grading done. Okay. So make sure that if you know you have to grade 10 problem sets on Tuesday the 14th, and you personally have a paper due 4 days after that, back that problem set up a few days. Or maybe you want to push it out past the time when you have to get your thing done, because then your thing is done and you can focus on your grading. Depends on how you work. Note when you need to have the grading done for each assignment. Okay, so if you're doing the formative iterative grading like I talked about, if you have the draft due and then 2 weeks later the final is due, you better have that sucker graded by the end of the first week. Okay, so make a note. Grading this must be done. Consider when your office hours are likely to get busy if you're holding office hours. Because I mostly deal with grad students, mine are by appointment because nobody has time. So if you are teaching and you need to hold office hours, notice where on your calendar you're likely to see your students, right? When are your office hours going to get filled up such that you will need to spend those 2 hours doing, I've known people who, would sit in their office, nobody would show up. So they just assumed that they could get some work done during those 2 hours. Look at the calendar and know when you're not going to have those 2 hours. Okay, consider when they're going to be showing up and pounding on your door, and you're not actually going to be able to do anything else but meet with students during those 2 hours, which is usually the week before something big is due. So you got to think about that too. That's step 8. Step 9 is a literal step. Get away from the calendar, get away from the computer. Your brain is probably scrambled by now. And what happens when your brain starts to get scrambled is you will be absolutely sure that you've mapped some assignment and you haven't done it. So just get away, go do something else. Literally, maybe go take a walk, go play with your dog, go visit with your partner who has probably been wondering what the heck you're doing shut up in your office all afternoon. But get away from it for a little bit, because coming back with rested, fresher eyes will make it much easier for you to see where there's going to be problems. By the time you've done all of this stuff, you have done so much patterning in your head that it's a Tetris game in there, and you need to just go and like let your screen refresh. Step 10, now you're back. Okay. So we've taken a deep breath. We're taking a look at everything again. And then, there's going to be some mistakes. Fix what you can, but you're not perfect. And neither is this course. Okay. I have this darling, fresh out of a postdoc, early career faculty member in my department. And she was just overwhelmed. And I said, let's look at your syllabus, which is where this workshop came from. And she was grading like 40 assignments every week. She was like, but I need them to achieve all these learning outcomes, and I need them to do this, and I need them to do that. And I was like, you don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be experts in community health when they come out of this course. They just need to do what they need to do in order to pass boards. Okay? You don't have to be perfect, and neither do they coming out. So remember that, yeah, there's probably going to be stuff where it's less than you would have liked, or it's different than you would have liked. Don't worry about it. Nobody's perfect. Make sure that your expectations are crystal clear for your students from day one of your class, okay? If you never answer your email on weekends, tell them that. Right? Because, and just by the way, it's not a bad idea to not answer student emails on the weekends, because that's when you have uninterrupted time that you can get your stuff done. Or, heaven forbid, spend time with your family, or your partner, or go out to the mountains or something, okay? But be really clear with them. I used to have it it may still be in there, in my email signature that said, I will answer most emails within 24 hours unless it is the weekend or I'm out of office. Always use your out of office if you are actually out of the office, okay? Don't forget. And you will always have that one student, or those two students, or those 5 students that are always at your office hours. So you never have, they're always there, or they're always asking questions, or they're absolutely sure that they know everything there is to know about this, and they don't really need to be taking your course anyway. So don't forget to breathe. Students are amazing. People are amazing. I tell my students in nursing all the time, I tell my students, people are messy and amazing, because no matter how carefully we think we've done an assessment or measured something, people are messy and amazing. And nature is infinitely wily, and I have a friend, okay, a really good friend. She's a larger woman. She's always been what is clinically considered overweight. She's a larger woman. Now, you would imagine that somebody with a weight problem would have cardiovascular issues. Her heart rate at rest is in the 50s. She's just made that way. When she's asleep, it can get down into the 40s. She's just built that way. People are messy and amazing. Students are messy and amazing. There will always be some students, they will come up with something that has gone wrong, or they will go at something from an angle that you would never have imagined. So remember to breathe. Find yourself a teaching mentor. We talked about this before about getting input as you're building your syllabus, but find somebody that you can go back to regularly. Someone who has already done this, preferably someone who's taught the course before or has expertise around it, or just even somebody who's really experienced in teaching and course development. Somebody who has done this before will catch things you didn't. And that needs to be someone you can go to if something goes wrong, right? If you assign a problem set and it turns out that half of the class can't do it, what are you going to do? That's when you might need a sounding board. So make sure that you have a teaching mentor, find somebody through Grad Academy, find somebody through the Center for Teaching and Learning, find a professor or a mentor in your own department, somebody who's a really good teacher, and just make sure that you have them kind of on speed dial so that you can, and then pay it forward, please. Once you've figured out how to do this, pay it forward to the people who come behind you. And don't be afraid to cut yourself and your students some slack if something just is not working. When I was at my second school, so I've been faculty, full-time faculty at 3 different schools. And at my second school, I got handed a course kind of last minute because somebody was leaving on, I think, I think she had a Fulbright or something. And so she was leaving. So they said, okay, you're going to take over this course. And I was like, okay, great. And I did not realize that there was a peer review exercise in it for their term papers. And I didn't realize that she hadn't given me that assignment. She hadn't given me like the peer review form or any guidance for the students. And we got to like almost the end of the term and they're like, this peer review assignment. And I was like, uh-oh. Well, we don't have a peer review assignment. And they were like, okay. So don't be afraid to cut yourself some slack. Don't be afraid to cut your students some slack. If you give an exam and there's a question that everybody gets wrong, throw that sucker out. Obviously, it didn't work. Okay. So give yourself some room. It will be better. And the more honest you are, the better for all of you, because now you're a person, right? You're not just this talking head that they have to go see every week. Okay. Those are the 10 steps. Those are sort of the 10 steps that I follow. They're the 10 steps that I try to get my grad students to follow. Just a few thoughts. Okay. Last kind of pieces of information that didn't seem to fit anywhere else in this presentation. If you are teaching online and you have an instructional designer in your school, your department, wherever, they are your new best friend. They are amazing. They can do incredible things. OIT here on campus can do, if you go on their website and look, they can build you the most amazing things. They built me an interactive timeline because the course I'm teaching for the undergrads this semester is the history of nursing. And I didn't want to have to spend hours and hours lecturing them about all of these things to get them to the point at which we were actually going to start studying the history, right? I needed to get them from sort of the beginning of nursing as a discipline to about 2020 or so, because we could start doing in-depth stuff between the 18th and 19th centuries, and then obviously COVID and stuff. But I wanted them to have an overview, and I didn't want to have to spend weeks doing it in class. So they built me this amazing interactive timeline, and I sat with the instructional designer for like hours, and I would say, okay, in 1820 we have this, and in 1920 here's Lavinia Dock and the settlement houses, and then in 2020 obviously we have the pandemic, and so he would go through and he would find imagery that made sense, that fit, and that they could use, because they're limited in what they can use because of copyright stuff. But I didn't have to search it. He found it all. And then he just loaded it in and he built me this gorgeous timeline so the students can kind of go through and click on stuff and it'll pop up and give them a little information. It's gorgeous. I loved it. And they had a blast. It was their first assignment. They went through that and then they did a discussion board post and responded to each other. They loved it. They had a great time. If you are teaching a large face-to-face class and you have never done that before, it is different. You're going to have to look some stuff up, look up how to do it. I've given you a website here, which I think is UW Wisconsin. They have some good references. They have some good tips in there for how to handle large classroom teaching. It is different. The first time I taught a class of 50 students as opposed to 15, I was thrown. So there are ways of doing it. If participation counts, if you're going to have a class participation component to the final grade, you need to give lots of options for participation, because some of us are introverts and we don't like to speak up in class. Okay, so you need to have a way for them to maybe post a reflection or send you a note saying, I really enjoyed this part of today's class, or something like that. It's just so you know that they were engaged. Textbooks for a lot of disciplines are junk by the time they come out. They are outdated and they're really expensive. If you can avoid a textbook, or you can find one that's online or that's inexpensive, or you can work with the library and get extra reserves, do it. Because especially for undergraduate courses, you end up with these big, heavy tomes, and honestly, you may not even open it. So think about that as you are planning how people are going to acquire knowledge, and what they're going to have for references for your class. Do your own midterm evals if you can. If your department doesn't do a midterm eval, do one yourself, especially if it's the first time, because you need to know how things are going. And you may not be able to tell just from class or just from how things are being turned in. Ask them, How is this going? Okay. You can do it anonymously, just build a Google form, have them fill it out, whatever. You can do it in writing, you can do it. There's a million different ways you can do it. There's lots of stuff on the internet about how to do this as a teacher, but it's a good idea to kind of take the temperature of the course in the middle, because you don't want to get to the end and find out that they hated you. That's going to do nasty things to your evaluations and depress you anyway. Okay. Always end early, which is what we're going to do now. This was a tip I got from my graduate advisor. Always end early. It makes people happy. And that is the end of that. Hi, Jason.
Hey. All right, so now would be the time for like the participants to, really ask questions if they would like to, because right after that, like it's, the session's gonna end.
Beverly?
Yes, hello, thank you. I have a question about the team projects. And I understand it from a teaching point of view that it's less for you to grade, but how are you accurately assessing how the student is doing? Because there's always in a team, there's always one slacker.
That's a great question.
Because personally, I'd rather get a 0 than do a team project.
No, I hate them too. That is a great question. I have my students label what they did. So they
Okay.
have to, so like with the paper outline, they had to tell me who was going to write which sections. And then when they turn in the paper, it's going to be labeled. Jalea wrote this section. Mark wrote this section. Mike wrote this section. So that I'll know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And you can also have them rate each other. If they know that's going to happen, they'll work harder.
Thanks.
Jason.
Thank you so much. Great tips, really grateful for these. Thanks so much, Dr. Burton. I guess one question I have is if you're looking at the same assignment multiple different times and giving feedback each time, do you find that it's necessary to go back and kind of look at previous feedback that you've given to see if they've actioned it, or do you just kind of move forward with it?
There are ways to do that. So if you have them do their assignments in Google Docs, for example, and you tell them leave my comments in, then you'll know. So if you want to do that, that's one way to do it. For me, I usually don't have a problem kind of remembering what was going on. And if you do electronic versions of it, then you have it saved somewhere probably anyway. You can do that to see if they've actually attended to it. If you're reading it and you feel like either they didn't get it or they missed it, you're going to want to mark it again. But yeah, generally there are, in Canvas, there's this speed grader thing, and you can go back and see your comments from previous iterations because they'll still be there. So that's another thing. If you're grading in Canvas, for God's sake, use the speed grader. It is so much easier.
Awesome. So I'm gonna start wrapping it up. But if you like, you do have questions, like continue up until the end. I'd just like to thank Dr. Burton for sharing their time and expertise with us today, and to thank our participants for joining us today. And before you guys rush out of here, I'd like to drop a link in the chat. It'll take you to like a post-workshop survey. So let me drop that for you guys. All right. Let me go ahead and stop the recording and end the session if there's nothing else from.
I am also going to put my email in the chat in case anybody has questions later. I know it was on that last slide, but that also went by kind of fast. So there's my email in the chat if you have specific questions, or honestly, if you want me to take a look at your syllabi and tell you if you're crazy, that's fine too. Yes, Jason, we will share the slide deck. I will send it over to the Grad Academy as a PDF, and they will get it out to you guys.